Yeah. Let me give you something that's a little bit more direct.
Sure.
And this is from unity.org. And unity.org is essentially a group that's like multi-faith.
Right.
Right. All roads get to heaven, right? I was going to say all dogs go to heaven, but that's a movie.
That's a movie.
That's a movie, yeah.
Well, you can call us dogs. We are sinners, so whatever. Yeah.
Okay, so in an article that they wrote, they have this quote from someone named Marcus Borg. Mm-hmm. And Marcus Borg said, one of the hallmarks of Jesus' teachings was his pointed attacks on the purity system. Mm-hmm. This was the dominant theme in the Jewish social world during his time, and it was focused on creating a world with sharp social boundaries between pure and impure, righteous and sinner, whole and not whole, male and female, rich and poor, Jew and Gentile. Jesus deliberately replaced the core value of purity with compassion. Continuing in the article, they say, if you follow the teachings of Jesus rather than the teachings about Jesus, the answer appears to be yes, Jesus was inclusive. If you study what Jesus taught and did, you see that he was, in the words of Bible scholar Marcus Borg, radically inclusive. He said to love one another, and he exemplified that by honoring and caring about people of all backgrounds. Jesus' compassion was notably evident in his habitual participation in an open and inclusive table. Sharing a meal with someone in those days signified mutual acceptance. Jesus ate with the outcast, the downtrodden, anyone who was considered impure. Okay, so that's a little bit more direct.
Right. It's so funny because he was radically inclusive, just not in the way they're talking about.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's always a nugget of truth. Like, you're reading that and you're saying, like, okay, like, it's, oh, wow, he was. Like, yeah, he did have, I mean, having women as a part of his group and that they are named is by societal standards, but it's not for the reasons they're putting.
Right.
You know what I mean?
You're
missing the point.
It's really not. And there are some very interesting conclusions that they're drawing.
100%.
And they're drawing all of their conclusions. I find this really fascinating. They're drawing all their conclusions based off of assumed cultural conditions.
Right.
And what I found really interesting about this particular article, the article says that you should not listen to what people teach about Jesus, but listen to Jesus.
Right.
But the entire article only quotes people who are teaching about Jesus.
Right.
And yet the only quote of Jesus they have is from Matthew 22:37 through 40.
Right.
And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Mm-hmm. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Upon these two commandments hang the whole law and the prophets. And what's interesting to me about that, that's the only thing from Jesus they quoted.
Right.
And the first thing Jesus says there is, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. We understand that to be a devotion to God.
Right.
And this whole article is about how you can be of any faith and reach God.
Right.
And that's not what Jesus says in this.
Right.
Right.
People like the second one. The second command that's like it, really what Jesus is doing in the Great Commission, or not commandment, not the commission.
Right.
Sorry, in the Great Commandment is he's breaking down the 10 Commandments.
Yes.
The first part of the 10 Commandments, the first 5 are all about loving God. The last 5 are all about loving our neighbor.
Yeah.
And so he's summarizing all of that in 2 very succinct statements. But the single most important commandment, number 1, is about having no other gods but God.
And that's the thing, is that's the first and most foundational thing.
100%.
That has to come first.
You can't love anybody else until you truly love God.
Right, exactly. And that's Tommy and I just finished going through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John.
Right.
And that's the whole crux of John is it's like you need to love God.
Right.
But if you don't love people, it's obvious you don't love God.
Right.
What
they're missing here in this is what God loves. You see, that's the missing point here.
Right.
You do love God and you do love others, but if you truly love God, you're going to love what God loves.
Right.
And God loves more than just people.
Yes, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think what ends up happening is, as we've talked about, there's a lot of vagueness in that first context.
Sure.
There's some more directness here, but nobody ever defines inclusion.
Sure. Right, because he actually puts the words, Borg actually puts the words, or the website does, acceptance in there.
Yes.
And that was interesting to me. When I first read that, I was like, ooh, he's adding his own definition of inclusivity.
Yeah.
So what is the definition, Tim?
Yeah, no, that's great. Maybe acceptance is the radically inclusive part.
Yeah.
But according to Oxford, the definition of inclusion, there's two definitions here. One, including or covering all the services, facilities, or items normally expected or required.
Mm-hmm.
So, you have an all-inclusive stay at a
Right.
hotel or resort,
Right. Yeah.
Or two,
Cozumel. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Not excluding any of the parties or groups involved in something.
Mm-hmm.
And then Merriam-Webster just says including everyone. Now, one of the things here's where I think inclusion breaks down.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at that second one,
Mm-hmm.
not excluding any of the parties or groups involved in something. I think when people say inclusion, they only think the first half,
Oh, for sure.
not excluding any parties or groups.
Mm-hmm.
But the second half says that party or group needs to be involved in
something. Oh,
Right.
100%.
And I would go as far as to say a specific thing.
Right. Oh, well, for sure. Jesus didn't just come just to include people.
Right.
You know?
And so this is where people miss what inclusion is. And you and I have had this discussion before. Inclusion is a doorway,
Right.
not an end result.
Right.
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 And we've talked about this analogy of, if you've got a bunch of kids playing baseball
Mm-hmm.
and another kid walks up with a soccer ball, inclusion is inviting him to play baseball.
Sure.
But if he doesn't drop the soccer ball, he's not going to be a part of the team.
100%. Right.
Right? He can't bring the soccer ball and change the rules of the game, and suddenly now it's Calvin ball.
Right.
It can't. You can't do. That's not.
Right.
Now, look, if they all agree together,
Right.
that we're going to change the game we're playing,
Right.
then you can have inclusion in a different game,
Right.
but not inclusion in baseball.
Ball. Right. 100%.
Because
Right.
now it's not baseball.
Right. It's no longer playing what you were playing. 100%.
Exactly. And I think so that is what people like unity.org miss is when you say you're included,
Right.
there's still a requirement to be included,
Right.
right? Like,
Oh, 100%. I mean, and we're going to talk about this and we're going to look at Jesus and we're going to break all this down. But I mean, just on the basis of just everything we're talking about right now, I think it's important just to say that, like, the game we're playing is Christianity.
yeah,
That door is open to everybody.
yeah,
But if they don't want to play,
right,
and if we decide to change it, okay, then we're not playing Christianity anymore.
right.
And if they don't want to play, that's not us excluding them. That's them choosing to exclude themselves.
100% exactly.
You see what I'm saying?
Imagine going to work and saying, I didn't get a paycheck this week.
Right.
And they're like, well, you didn't work this week. Well, that's not very inclusive work job.
Right.
I thought this was
right.
an inclusive environment.
Right.
No, inclusion is that you are invited to partake, but if you don't put in the work, you don't get the paycheck.
Right.
You don't get the reward. You don't get the benefit.
Right.
Right. And guess who defines what that work is?
Right.
Your employer.
Your employer does. Right. 100%.
And that's the exact same way it works, not just in Christianity, but in all religions, really.
Sure.
If you want to be a Muslim,
Right.
you have to
100%.
follow the tenets of Islam.
That
right?
was in Jesus' day, Judaism, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, and that's where I think the kind of confusion comes in, because Jesus is radically inclusive in the aspect of, like, he's doing, like, the Jews were all about the law, but Jesus is setting up a different kind of covenant.
Yes.
But it's still a covenant and it's still rooted in something, and he's still doing something specific. You see?
Yeah, I do.
And so yeah, he's being radically inclusive, but what he's including them into is something far bigger than just the law.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. So we can ask, is Jesus inclusive? We've already said yes.
Yeah.
So if we look at John 1:11 through 13, this is what it says. He came to his own, and his own people did not accept him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of a man, but of God. Right? So what we see right here, what John is setting up, is you didn't have to be Jewish to accept him.
Right.
Anyone who received him got the gift.
Right.
Right? So anyone.
Right.
If you receive Jesus, you get the gift of Jesus.
Right.
But what we have to break down, the whole point of Christianity
Right.
is to understand what it means to receive
See, Jesus. Right. 100%. Yeah.